Recording in progress.
Board of Zoning Appeals. I would like to call our portion of the meeting to order for February 15th, 2022.
All right, as the chairman of DRB, I'm going to call the meeting to order for DRB's February 15th special meeting with the joint Bza.
Yeah, so our agenda for tonight is starting with the pledge, introducing all of our members, and it'll be a training session for our joint boards, followed by a question and answer, and then adjourning. It's scheduled for a 1-hour session from 5 to 6 p.m. So with that, I'd ask you to please stand and join us for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Would you like to have your board members introduce themselves?
All right.
Charlie?
Charlie Roberts, Freemanville Road.
Reed Casey, Bethany Road.
Ken Warlick, Hipworth Road.
Doug Haney, Bethany Way.
Casey Robinson, Bethany Bend.
Yeah, that's interesting. We don't do that in the BZA, so maybe we'll start doing that. Todd Chernick, Bethany Green.
Hodge Patel, Stillhouse Lane.
Oh, wrong side.
Hampstead, Birmingham Road.
Don Kurt, Belterre Drive.
Harry Cohen, Autumn Close.
David Jackson, Bethany Way.
Sorry.
So with that,
One more.
we have one more to introduce themselves.
Adam Danella on BZA 3119 Haybridge Lane.
With that, I turn it over to the city attorney to guide us through the rest of this training.
Thank you and good evening, everyone. I've been before the BZA on multiple occasions. I don't know if I've been before the DRB, and it's a pleasure to be able to do that this evening. My name is Paul Fricke. I'm with Gerard and Davis. I'm one of the attorneys that represents the city. I sit regularly with the Board of Zoning Appeals and with the Planning Commission. I've attended regular city council meetings on occasion when the need called or a special item was there. Tonight, what I've come to you to do is it's called training, but maybe it's training for some, refresher for some, input for everyone that I'm going to give with respect to the meetings and primarily what the role is and what the process of accomplishing that role is. The first that's an interesting delay. The first question we always look to is do we have rules of procedure? Do we have bylaws? Do we have any guides, statutory or documentary guides that we look to? And of course, each of the two boards has a set of bylaws. Those bylaws are authorized in the City of Milton Charter, which basically says any board or commission is authorized to adopt its own procedures, and each of these two boards have done so. I note for the DRB, there's a particular provision in section 641120 that references that Robert's Rules of Order apply. The way that's kind of worked out is the charter says you may adopt rules as long as they're not in conflict with any other provision. Generally speaking, Robert's rules don't conflict with your bylaws. So following your bylaws is going to get you where you need to go, and for the most part is going to comply with what Robert's rules requires. Mostly that's just the motion practice. what's the order of motions? When is a motion to amend? When does that supersede a motion, the main motion? Probably don't need to do those things, just happen naturally. And so it's very logical. I wouldn't worry too much about it. From what I have seen, generally speaking, I know the BZA doesn't have that restriction. DRB, I'm not really concerned. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we get into the general practice of running the meetings. But I just thought I'd throw that out there. BZA's, its duties are set out in Chapter 2, actually, in one spot, but primarily, as you know, to hear primary and secondary variances. Primary variances are, in effect, a change to what is required by the code, the zoning ordinance. So whereas the zoning ordinance may require a minimum of a certain number of feet or a maximum height, the variance allows an applicant to come in and say, I'd like to do this even though the code doesn't allow it. Secondary variance, I'm not sure where the term came from because what it really is, it's an appeal of a decision for the most part. That's what it probably gets referenced as an appeal in many cases. It's someone coming in who has gotten a decision from one of the directors of the departments, typically from the community development director, that says, your situation requires you to do this, or the code says that your doghouse constitutes a kennel and therefore must be 200 feet from the property line or the nearest residence or something like that. And they may decide, I don't think my doghouse constitutes a kennel as contemplated by the code. I'd like to appeal the community development director's decision. They will come before this board, the BZA, and ask you to either affirm or deny the community development director's decision. We'll get to those options later on. But those are the two principal things that the BZA will be dealing with. We call it a quasi-judicial board. And in both of those applications are either quasi-judicial or almost directly judicial. An appeal is almost directly judicial. But the relevance of that is for how appeals from the BZA are taken to court. In one situation where they're quasi-judicial, it goes based on the record that's created here. So all the evidence that's presented here, you're faced with evaluating what is presented before you and deciding whether a variance is appropriate based on the standards that you have, or whether the decision of the community development director or other director was appropriate based on the information presented to you at that hearing. So that you take that presented to you, apply the code as you, the board, read it, and render a decision based on that. That's what makes it quasi-judicial. And there's chances for the applicants to present whatever information they want. Now, I've got some case law there for you if you wanted to see it, but that's the basic idea. The appeals, almost directly judicial. Variances have been determined by case law to be quasi-judicial as a matter of case law. The DRB is a little bit of a different body. It's got kind of a different role in some aspects and a similar role in others. The DRB's code, and this is set out in real small detail because I got it all on there, but the point to make is it was created as kind of a window to what's going on to the public so that the public can see what's going on. Then this board will review almost all of the, I think essentially non-residential development that goes on and make sure that it's in compliance with the city's code. The city has put very detailed, in many cases, rules and regulations in place, and the design review board is supposed to review and make sure that those are being complied with. In addition, you get the first look at all the proposals to change the zoning and for zoning modifications. So rezonings, zoning modifications, use permits, things that the city council, the planning commission, then eventually the city council are going to decide for changes to the way things are right now. You get the first look at, and you get to see what the plans are, and you get to comment on that. Those are kind of the review and recommendation role, which is, and you apply these public policy objectives, these purposes as the broad general terms that are spelled out in this section 64-973. And you can see they're very broad. You know, the purpose, to foster civic pride, promote attention to accepted design principles. They're big picture items, which you kind of look at the details to make sure these big pictures are being complied with in these changes. So here's where the details of what the DRB's role are. Section 230 and 231. Board is charged to review all non-residential plans for development and then the various overlay districts. And it also includes, all sorts of the other districts and overlays and form-based codes. But they were added in after these two sections had been adopted. But to review for compliance with standards within the zoning ordinance, and then make recommendations prior to approval of disturbance LDPs, building permits, and primary variances. Now, but what I found, and I think this is happening, but kind of in a two-step process, and I think it makes sense for this to be a one-step process, and that's the construction, the building permit kind of phase. According to the code, the DRB actually itself is charged with issuing certificates of endorsement. And based on the criteria of the zoning ordinance, along with other criteria that are in the code, that have been adopted in the code. And DRB is supposed to consider the applications for certificates of endorsement. And basically that means approval of the permit. I mean, that's effectively what a certificate of endorsement means. As I understand it now, effectively what's happening is the board is approving, and then staff will issue it based on that approval, which is in effect the same thing. I mean, you're making the decision, which they then implement. And I'm going to kind of make a recommendation that we kind of adopt this language to have the board issue the certificate of endorsement for a particular project, whatever application comes before you, based on this criteria and this language in the code. Doesn't change what you're actually, the nuts and bolts of what you're doing, just kind of some language things. There's one other thing that has a little different language, and that's demolition permits. The code, section 642425, specifically establishes that the DRB is the body that issues or denies demolition permits. So that would be just a simple approval or a denial of an application for a demolition permit. You could attach conditions to it as well. This section sets out the considerations that the DRB would consider if and when a demolition permit application comes before you. And I know they have. I don't know they come often, maybe a few times a year, but just something to know that
More
it's
like 5 a month.
Excuse me?
5 a month.
Oh, then I was unaware that there was that much. Well, great. Then keeping this in front of you for each one of those would be a helpful thing as you can consider those things. And we can get
Questions we need to ask ourselves.
Yeah, can we ask a couple of questions here?
Yeah, and I should have said at any time, I'm going to whip through a lot of this stuff, and near the end, there's going to be, I'm going to try and fit it all in, and I may be skipping over some things, but if anything pops up that's of importance, please wave me down.
Here's my first question, then I know Reed has a question. 95% of the time, we're all about demos. Generally, it's a rundown building, it has no value. The city's enhanced by it going away. Away goes a $200,000, $300,000 demo, and back comes $1 million house or structure. What if we do turn down a demo? What real right do we have to turn down a demo other than if it's a historic structure?
Well,
What grounds could we really turn down a demo? And we've got a couple of cases out there that are going to be controversial.
Well, I will tell you, they have to get your approval based on these standards. The city has determined that they don't want things to be just torn down without a permit. If you feel it doesn't meet these criteria, then you are justified in refusing to let it be demolished.
There's one line on here. You may have to pull it back up. I can barely read this on the PowerPoint, but it says, number
number?
5 or 6,
6.
whether it's determined, I can't read it. Where is it? whether the building structure or site is object to the last one remaining examples of its kind in the community. That's a pretty broad
Sure.
statement, but could answer no to that on some of the,
Just don't be the last one left.
whether there are definite plans for use of the property. I mean, it's a pretty, I guess we could deny it for really any reason.
What if
Under some
you,
of those questions.
my land use question,
Mhm.
and I'm a developer, so I'm out there looking at land use all the time. What if we would think that tearing it down changes the character
That's number 6.
6.
of a neighborhood? Are you comfortable that we, based on number 6, have that authority to say, we're not going to deny that demo because it would change the character of a neighborhood?
Absolutely. That would appear to be one of the factors specifically tasked to be considered.
Okay.
Changing it specifically in a negative way.
Well, we would perceive it to be negative because
Right.
we denied it.
Because change, demolition is by itself a change,
Right.
but it has to be a negative, you interpret it as a negative change.
Well, that's,
By getting
that's
rid
a
of it.
better, like we say, 95%, we think it's a positive change. So yeah, it would be a negative.
Yeah, on that general statement as to it, yes, it appears to fall right within one of these criteria.
It looks like we can poke and prod on what their intentions are on the site, maybe a little bit more than we have in the past, or I know certainly I have in the past. Number 8.
Yeah, I mean, some of the, it's more, should be larger. I think a lot of these are geared toward the value of the existing structure and whether it makes sense to take that down. A little less than, I'm worried about what's going to go in its place. That said, plans for use, 6 is exactly that, plans for the use of the property if the proposed demolition is carried out. So it does definitely allow you to address that.
Here we got a little neighborhood with a, not historic, but a 20s, 30s cute house, neighborhood's low profile. The demo causes a 4-story commercial building to come back in its place adjacent to a neighborhood. So we might deny that because it changes the character of the neighborhood.
I'm here saying legally that is contemplated here.
Okay,
You
good.
know, the scope of what the DRB, and again, I'll get to this near the end, or in the middle there. I'll talk about it tangentially right now. Precedents, while there is typically no absolute, you have set an absolute precedent for everything going forward, I do say you need to bear in mind, at least as a perception of equality, that if there's no significant differences in one project versus another project, to bear in mind that you should treat everybody equally,
Correct.
in each situation. But again, I'll tell you that no two properties are exactly the same.
So is there an appeal process on a denied application for demolition?
There is, and I don't know if I put it in here. I think it's actually, I could get that for you, but I'm actually pretty sure it even actually spells out don't recall if it comes to the BZA. It may actually come to the BZA. Yeah, actually, if you would. Yeah, it could be BZA, could be City Council, or it could be Superior Court. Those are the typical routes an appeal might travel. I feel like it goes to the BZA. Alternatively, I think then it would go to the Superior Court, but we'll get that for you.
I'm familiar with case history for us where we've had demolition happen without a permit, which has a consequence. How many years of not being able to get a 5 years?
Yeah. Actually, there were 2 recently.
Yeah, and we've had to intervene in those essentially appeals.
Yeah, and those were interpretations of the code made by the community development director saying code says you've got 5 years. They were asked for the BZA to determine whether or not that 5-year limitation applied to that particular situation.
And that was as a secondary variance appeal.
Yes.
Yeah.
A quick question. Back in the very beginning, you said the DRB deals with non-residential situations. That can't be the only thing they do, because we get all the time DRB recommendations regarding residential situations.
Well, they will, well, I don't know about variances.
If it's a variance.
Non-residential design and LDP.
I think they can, on variances.
For
that-
variances,
for-
they just look.
It's
Var-
the,
they
it's
get
the
to review all
architecture of a
variances.
single-family house. You want to build a single-family house, it doesn't come to
Yeah.
DRB.
And I,
You want to add an addition,
Right.
and it's in the creek buffer, they're going to file for a variance. We're going to look at it, then send it to you.
yeah.
Look at it because the variance is going to be, okay.
Every variance, every rezoning, every use permit, they'll get the
Yes.
first look at. And I probably should have clarified that earlier. Yeah, you will, the variances are among that list of things.
But those reviews in those situations, including, I think, a case we'll be hearing tonight, are
Yeah.
those binding?
Those are
Or
they're
courtesy.
courtesy reviews.
The
We're sending
cursor-
you our recommendations.
Yes. And as I recalled, the precedence is my next slide, which is to say, every decision rests on its own facts. Property has been ruled by the courts to be unique. Each piece of property is unique. I mean, you can have exactly the same measurements, and one is still closer to the school or closer to the intersection. There's always some uniqueness to it. That said, if all relevant aspects, if we're talking about the distance from the creek, and they're both equidistant from the creek, they're both the same sizes, they're going to put exactly the same building on there, they probably should be treated the same. I'm not going to say it's a precedent, but for equal protection sort of arguments, if they were to go to court, that's what we would like to see, is that if all relevant aspects are the same, we'd like to probably see the same result in each of the same cases.
I think this is the swimming pool buffer in the creek buffer variance that you see dozens of.
Yeah, and again, those are, that is true. Of course, there's always, how many trees are there? How many, are they 50 feet from the nearest house? Are they 35 feet from the nearest house? Is it a 12-story or a 4-story house or a 2-story house,
How much do what the neighbors have to think come into play? Because we'll have folks show up and say, all my neighbors are okay with this. And if someone shows up and says, none of my neighbors are okay with it, then
They'll have a little bit of different bearing depending on which board. Let me kick through the variance standards real quick and then get to the types of how the meetings are run, and it should come up in that. But there is definitely some play, but we'll see how it plays out. Y'all have seen this, and this is the important thing for y'all, for the Bza Variant Standards. 4 standards. I've highlighted the "and" because according to the code, all 4 of these standards are supposed to be met. Relief would not offend the spirit and intent of the zoning ordinance. So if the purpose of the zoning ordinance is generally to keep development into a certain area, and this is way outside of that, that's not the spirit and intent. It's kind of a vague term, kind of a nebulous term that's out there, and you can read it, what one intent might be different in one jurisdiction or one zoning district than it would be in another zoning district. So, you look at it, it's not a lot of help in making a final decision, because it could be read kind of both ways, just depending how you look at it. Extraordinary and exceptional situations or conditions pertaining to this particular piece of property. That's the nut and bolts of what a variance, in my mind, really is the code is written to apply to the entire city. They can't pick every little situation and codify how the city wants to treat each piece of property. There's tens of thousands of parcels. So what it's done is it tried its best to zone it into various districts and apply general requirements to those districts. Now, someone may come in and say, hey, you made me set 30 feet back, but I've only got 50 feet, or the 60 feet at the widest part. My front buffer and my rear buffer take me out of everything, on my particular piece of property. Okay, that's fair. You've got an extraordinary and exceptional situation based on the size, shape, and topography of the lot. Probably fair to give you a variance. But you also have to show you're not going to cause, number 3, substantial detriment to the public good and surrounding people.
Before you jump to number 3, on number 2, in defining hardship, it's not financial hardship. It's hardship based on, can you clarify?
Sure. And in the end, it probably, it could be boiled down to a financial hardship. I can't sell my house, or I can't sell the property because I can't build anything on it. So it probably comes back to, in the end, a financial decision. It's not a defined term either. So that's somewhat how each of you individually feel the hardship is. I mean, they can't say it would be worth, it's not to say it would be worth more if I did this. That doesn't mean it's a hardship. That just means it would be worth more. Now, if I can't build anything and I will lose all value in this property, that to me would be more hardship related as opposed to just, I couldn't get as much profit as I otherwise would have.
So say this applies to a pool. They have a stream in the backyard. They can't put a pool in the backyard. They want to put it in the front yard because they can't put it in the backyard. Is that a hardship, or they just can't put a pool in?
That is a question that,
And then could you add one thing to that? What if they bought this house knowing there was a creek? But I mean, this is what we see, like you see. They bought the house knowing it. They bought it with a big buffer, as a pretty view. 5 years later, now they want a pool.
I will say it is easier in my mind without any additional facts to say that isn't really a hardship. I haven't had to litigate that. I don't know of a case that directly questioned whether having a pool is a hardship. I have seen an argument where someone at least addressed that and tried to make the argument that every other house or most of the houses in my neighborhood might have a pool. I can't sell my house without a pool because everyone else that's putting their houses on the market have a pool and mine won't sell. I will give them credit for making the argument.
Right, but each property,
I mentioned,
right, is
Yeah,
unto
yeah.
itself. And so there is no real comparisons or precedent in that fact that everyone else has one, therefore I deserve one. Correct?
fair.
And
You know, they can come in, if they come in with an appraiser and a real estate agent who supports all that, maybe they can make that.
I had a question though pertaining to your extreme example where because of the ordinances, the zoning, it would render the property unbuildable. That's a different scenario than the conditions of the property don't allow for an addition or a
Yes.
pool.
Yes.
Those are not, you're not entitled to that as much as you are to actually build a structure
Yes. And-
by Georgia law.
Right. And that's, and by the way the code is written.
Right.
Some codes make these an and, all four must be met. Other codes have an or there, which means if you can show that it's not going to hurt anyone, what's the bother? Some are written that way. Some say, hey, it doesn't matter if it hurts anyone as long as you show that it's, you know, a significant detriment to your property. But this one says the city has adopted a code that says all four must be met in order to justify the grant of a variance. So that's what you are supposed to be looking at.
So you've mentioned precedent. If we allow a pool in the front yard, does that mean everybody that wants a pool in the front yard?
My first answer is no. It does not mean that. There's nothing about one particular property that it's unique. You apply these four standards to the application that's presented before you and see what the hardship is that they've presented, whether it would impact the neighbors, and look at that each one. Just because, I mean, the houses are going to be different sizes, different shapes. The pool may be 30 feet closer to the front or further from the back. So look at each one individually. Again, if they're exactly equal in every material respect, you probably want to come with the same result, regardless of how many people show up. If they're all the same, they should get the same result. But chances of them being absolutely the same in all respects is very slim.
So not only, so if you look at the property itself, can you look at the property on either side or front and back?
Sure, that's part of the standards here. The third one is impact to the detriment to the public good.
And these are requirements essentially in their letter of intent anyway, right, for their variance application.
Yeah.
So they have been given these and
Yes.
understand when they come in front of the board, these are the criteria that you guys are going to be judging this on. So it's kind of like be prepared, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. The other thing I guess I would point out is I kind of want them to be able, I mean, this is an appeal. So under the circumstances, they should be arguing why they apply each one of these to their situation rather than us making that decision for them. You know, to me, they should stand up there and say, here's how I comply with 1, 2, 3, and 4. It was denied by the city, but this is what I think is right. Now y'all make the decision.
Well, and let me distinguish between the variance. It hasn't been denied yet. Well, maybe they came in, maybe they looked at it and said, I see that I need a 25-foot setback and I really want to do 15.
Right.
So they don't go and get it denied. They just come and get it, file the application. The staff will require them to address the 4 criteria, and they will put that in the staff report. So you will see at the outset what their response to those are. Some of them are better than others. And you can question them as to, I'm not sure where you're coming from on your hardship,
Yeah, there was something else too. I mean, Reed can answer to this, and maybe Charlie the same, but a realtor would be able to say, if somebody were to buy a property, listen, for the pool situation and looking at the piece of property, I mean, you're going to be telling them, hey, I mean, if somebody brings it up, y'all aren't going to be able to build a pool here if y'all decide you want this property. Or maybe if they bring it up, you can say, well, you're going to have some issue because you're going to have some variance issues, right? I mean, just from a realtor's perspective.
Theoretically.
That's not going to happen in the real world.
you will see
It doesn't
coming,
really hold any water.
The
Just
doc-
like the HOA says we can do, it doesn't hold any water.
Right.
and the hardship a
It
lot of
doesn't come up
times,
in conversation then.
I will say the hardship sometimes
They
we
don't
get
have
is,
a choice these days. They just have to buy it anyway. It doesn't matter.
yeah, I mean, people have come in and said, but the realtor said I could put a pool here. That's why I bought the house. The realtor said I could do this. Now I can't. I need a variance. That multiple times that has been kind of how we got to the variance step. I'm gonna kick through. There's sign variances. They come in less often, but they're a little different standard. That will be made apparent to you if and when those come up, just to let you know that they're different standards. Basically, it's a hardship where you can't read the sign if you put it up where the code required it. Those of you who've been around know about the 25, 50, 75-foot stream buffers. Basically, as I said, 25-foot stream buffer, you can't do anything in according to the state. Cities adopted an extra 25 feet, which they call the 50-foot buffer. Basically, again, can't disturb anything within 50 feet of the creek. Then finally, there's what's called the 75-foot setback. It's an extra 25 feet beyond the 50-foot. You can disturb it. You just can't put any impervious surface in there. So you can't you can't build in it. I don't think you put driveways, anything that's impervious. Okay. Yeah. Of course.
Well, hang on, go back to that. What's number
Can you?
3?
Yeah, it says you can.
Whoops. Hang on.
Number 3.
Yeah, no septic tanks, drain fields. That mean lines though.
That's
What
the
a drain
drain
field is.
field.
It
I
says
was
drain.
wondering.
yeah,
And then the
drain.
question is that the primary or the secondary? Because you can design a septic system and the primary could be out of that. But the only way that you can actually make that system work is by having a secondary that's shown in that stream buffer. And so in that case, would they have to apply for a variance knowing very well that they can't get approval from Fulton County because their secondary line is within the stream buffer?
I was speaking of the last 75, which is impervious. Oh, I see.
Yeah, it's just in general, is buffer or setback. I think it's a good question because as the lots are being built out.
And this is new, right? The 75?
Not particularly.
No,
No,
it's
it's-
been adopted since we've been a city.
Oh, okay.
But each municipality has relatively different interpretations about what they will and will not allow in those.
Can we get clarification on that number 3?
I'm writing that down too. I'll get with staff and talk about that. And
In particular, which buffer is that referring to? Is it all or? Because it doesn't clarify.
Buffer, is it?
Right.
well, it would be for the city, because this is part of the city code, it would be the 50-foot buffer, but it mentioned the 25-foot setback.
Correct. It says
So,
both, right?
Yeah, as I'm reading it, as I cut and pasted it from the code,
This is from the code, exactly.
it says that they shouldn't. We'll make sure whenever that issue comes up that we've got that firmly addressed. But
Yeah.
What does undisturbed, how was that really interpreted? I mean,
don't cut anything down. Don't.
Okay, so this came up actually in my own neighborhood recently. There's a whole bunch of kudzu growing around by the stream. And the neighbors think it looks ugly and they want to cut it back. Can we cut it down to 1 foot off the ground if it's 15 feet high? Or does it just mean you can't pull the plants out? I don't know, undisturbed mean, what does it mean? You can cut it down a little bit or you can't cut it down a little bit? It was very unclear. We had this argument.
Yeah, I mean, I read it as not cutting anything. Yeah.
Untouched is the
So we
way.
have to leave the kudzu there. We can't even cut it back.
That's the way it reads, and that's, a strict interpretation of it. I don't know if there have been attempts to wiggle around it.
Nobody likes kudzu, so probably nobody complained, but. All right.
That could be.
Paul, can you clarify one other point,
Yep.
going back to septic tanks? We've had several recent cases that involve flow wells. And how do the flow wells apply when we're talking about being in the buffer? Are they permitted or not permitted as well, just similar to septic tanks?
I'm not 100%. I know the term, and I know they apply to cover runoff from pools. I don't know how they're structured, but it seems to me they would not be allowed to be in the setback as they would. I don't know if they're impervious or not.
Well, they are supposed to take care of quality, so they filter the water before it drains.
If it filters, that may be an interpretation.
Stormwater engineer.
Yeah, and that may be something that's an interpretation that we get going for, but we'll make sure we get that too.
Because it wouldn't technically be impervious.
Right, that's what I was saying. If it's designed to drain water through it, that's the definition of pervious.
But you'd have to disturb it to put it in.
But you can within that 25 foot.
Yeah,
Just not the state 25.
Correct.
all right. And there are, again, specific standards set for stream buffer variances. I mean, they largely mirror, they just kind of boil them down into two. Yeah.
Can you clarify a recent change to the ordinance with respect to properties that have been platted and the date change for that?
Right, so basically anything that was platted prior to December 1st, 2006, and let's say it identified the stream buffer as just the state buffer, the 25, or if then that's what we have to go by.
But it's kind of a way of codifying a vested right argument. A lot of times I'll come in and say, hey, look, I got this plat. It says I can do this, but you changed the rules on me. There's a concept called vested rights, which means if you are told you could do something or it was allowed at the time, and then the city changes the rules, you have a vested right to develop according to what you were promised or what you started developing with. And the city can't go back and take it away from you. This, rather than trying to say you have to come in and prove it, you kind of just show that if your plat was recorded, and we'll go with what your plat recorded as of that date. After that, we codified the new rules, and you should comply with those new rules.
Even if you're not that owner that was prior to 2006?
Correct.
You're a subsequent owner after 2006.
Vested rights will transfer.
So what does conforming mean? Because I know properties have to be conformed if they're changed or altered, even if they were developed.
They're slightly different concepts, and the conforming versus non-conforming is largely the same thing. It's based on you had an existing structure, you had a building in existence, and we changed the rules. You don't have to go forward and get permission to do anything. You don't have to build anything. So we're going to let you keep that building. It's a non-conforming building. You may be too close to the property line. We're not going to go back now and say, you need to cut down 5 feet of your building. It's illegal. It's non-conforming, but it's not illegal. What that says, what you're talking about, the can't expand. If you have a non-conforming building, it's legal, but non-conforming. You can't expand it without getting a variance, or you can't put you can't make it closer. You can't put a new structure, tear it down and put a new one up in the same footprint. It's basically say, look, we're not going to make you tear anything down, but we have to recognize that it is not conforming. We don't want to allow it to continue unless you're just leaving it as is.
DRB require a site survey be updated to update the plat?
Not
But
one of the things that I'm aware of. I mean, they're just reviewing.
We've sent you cases where we're saying this is a non-conforming building. They want to do these things to it. If they will upgrade the architecture, improve the porches, put in new windows, and bring it to Milton standard, one of your criteria, and bring it to the standards we expect, then we would recommend you approve it. You don't have to, but, I think you have two of those kind of cases tonight that we held for a month or two till we got them where we felt if you're going to give the variance to a building in a buffer or whatever, that it's been brought to Milton's new standards, even though it was built non-conforming when it became non-conforming when the city was formed. But with a whole lot of improvements, bringing it up, then okay, you can keep the building, and now you brought it into what the city architect and the city has determined its new standards to be. We just try to enforce those standards.
I'm gonna try and kick through a bunch of things about how to run the meeting and how each of the two boards goes. You'll get the agendas beforehand. You don't need to memorize that. For primary variances, and this is a lot of stuff to say. Staff's gonna present. The board can ask staff any questions they want. The applicant gets up. You can ask questions of the applicant. Public speaks in favor. And the point I want to pull out of this is without changes, the public and the applicant get 10 minutes. You know, we're a little kind of, we try to define what's the applicant time and what's the question time so that we don't drag them with, 20 minutes of questions and then no one else can speak, in favor of it. We try to run with that. But just bear that in mind. If you can let them give their presentation and then ask all the questions, it's easier for staff and I to keep track of the timing. But after the public in favor goes, public in opposition goes, again, they get 10 minutes. Applicant gets rebuttal if there's time left. And then you can ask more questions. So you still got time to ask questions. If you go through everybody, I know sometimes it makes sense to ask them at the time, but even if you're done, you can call someone back up and ask someone that spoke or the applicant. Then close the public hearing. Process for the board is when the hearing is closed, we shouldn't be calling anyone back up. If you want to, it's doable. I'll ask a motion to reopen the public hearing, to vote on it, and then have the additional public comment, and then close the public hearing again.
And that includes additional questions for staff.
That should include additional questions to staff as well, yes.
The public hearing is closed, it's closed, and it's time for us to raise a motion.
That's the point. It's time, which we'll say the record that we send up to that the Superior Court may consider is ended at that point in time. No longer evidence to be put in the record. So basically, motion, second, discussion, vote. That's primary. Your options are approve, partially approve. So if there are multiple variances, you don't have to approve all of them or none of them. You can approve one or two of them. Approve and with conditions. You know that happens more often than not. You're attaching conditions. I'll talk about conditions with motions that apply to everyone. You have the option to deny. The wording of the code says an option to vote to hold for further study not less than 30 days. Effectively, that's a motion to postpone, motion to table, defer.
Defer is what we usually say.
Yeah, you usually say defer.
And Paul, can you address designing or solutioning as part of our deliberation?
Yeah, I've got it as conditions. I mean, the goal, let me see if I've got it. Conditions are absolutely legal. I mean, the case law has addressed, yes, you can impose conditions, no problem with that. The point of it is the condition is supposed to be and as it says, ameliorate the burden of the variance or whatever approval you're giving on the public. So it's not supposed to be a chance for you to say, I like pink better than blue, or I like crenellated walls. I'm making up terms again. Crenellation's better than flat roof lines. Unless you want to establish that's to the benefit of the public, and it's because I'm putting in this extra tall building, it's going to be seen by more people, so I want it to look better. Or, I want a buffer of this material to cover that ugly building that's going in closer to the property line.
Sounds like an external staircase.
The point is, it's not to try to design the product to just how you like it, but to protect the public interest. That may involve some design aspects. It may involve aesthetics. Aesthetics are a consideration that may be made by this board. Part of the reason for the city's code and making it fit with the spirit and intent of the code addresses aesthetics. So I don't want to weave you away from it, but I do want to caution against going too much into, I'd rather see 3 bedrooms than 4 bedrooms, or, you have to be able to address why you're doing this based on the impact to the public as a result of granting the variance.
The public or the city's published wishes for the way things to look.
Yeah, certainly that, if you can point to where it says that we want this type of look, that's all the better.
Well, and or the city architect has published and proven and shown that this is what the city wants.
Anything that you've got like that will further support doing it. If anyone were to challenge, if someone were to go to court and say, I think this condition is unconstitutional, it's overly broad, they shouldn't have imposed that, we say, well, it supports the city's vision of Milton as spelled out clearly in this code section or this staff policy.
Overlay
whatever.
district.
Yeah, overlay district, yeah.
So as a matter of rule, what I've learned over time is solutioning, or if there's material changes to the design, the plans, site plans, it's probably more wise. I'm looking for your confirmation of this. It's probably more wise to consider deferring to allow that applicant to make those changes so that we have something clear in order to approve into the record per the site plan or per the design. So would you concur with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's part of it, which is maybe not fully set out, and then kind of a combination of motions and conditions. Like, you want the conditions should be clear and reasonably enforceable. You want a code enforcement officer to be able to go out to the property and say, I can see that this condition is not met. Then again, if you are redesigning the whole project as you're sitting up here, the chances of you getting exactly what's going to work on the property right is maybe less likely than if they go do some engineered designs and come back and say, we've looked at the property, we looked at the design of the building and how things will set up, sight lines and fire codes, and we've determined that this works now. Then that is going to be a better and more likely option, that we don't have questions down the line when the staff or the code enforcement have to determine, did they build what they promised to build, and did that make sense when they went out there to do what y'all designed while you're sitting here in a 30-minute or 1-hour meeting.
Well, that
Well,
makes
let-
it,
Let me add something to that for our board
Yeah,
with 3 or 4 new people. And I'd like staff to hear this. There was a little upheaval on 2 of the cases that are coming before BZA because I held them for that exact reason, not to be difficult, but they were so bad. And I didn't want to impose my thoughts on those homeowners. I said, let's hold this for a month. You go get an architect and you get these designed that meets Milton standards. Robin wasn't quite sure I had the authority to do that. Later, she said I did, or we did. I'm only one vote. But it was more important for us to send it back and let the homeowner figure it out, rather than us do his design that later he could say, they made me do this.
yeah. Let me quick shift into, because the DRB is slightly different in its process. You got 2 types of reviews, basically, maybe a third type for demolition permits. But you got courtesy reviews and you got final decisions or certificates of endorsement, that sort of. For courtesy reviews, you're taking an application for some change, a variance, a rezoning, a use permit, a modification, and you're looking at it and you're just going, here's our comments, review, recommend. You can recommend approval. You can recommend approval with conditions. And those conditions are where you have, I think where the city council and the BZA are going to be looking for your input to say, y'all are I mean, these guys are somewhat experts. You guys are boots on the ground. You get the design process. You say, hey, here's what we want in design. If you're going to get this change, we want to see this. This is where you have, I think, the most, now you can't, you're not enforcing it. You're not slapping it on them, but you're telling people, look, we've looked at it. We think these things make sense. And so what I like to see y'all do is recommend approval with the following conditions. And I think a lot of times I see they had these comments. I would love to see recommend approval with conditions. You can recommend denial, and I would be fine to say recommend denial. But if there is approval, then these conditions, I've seen those sort of recommendations come forward. And it does say you have the option of approval conditions, denial, or deferral. So I think it states that you have the ability to vote to defer a decision. With respect to building permits themselves, I think there's a time limit. So I think you may run into, you can't defer it indefinitely for the final decisions. And again, those final decisions have the same essential list of options: approve the conditions, deny, or defer. But you are effectively making that decision. So the vote would, as opposed to a vote to recommend deferral or to recommend approval or recommend denial, you would be voting to approve a certificate of endorsement, voting to recommend denial of a certificate of endorsement, voting to recommend approval of a certificate of endorsement with conditions, or defer.
Once we move into the discussion on the application, do we have the right to then call back to the applicant and ask a clarifying question?
Yes.
Kind of going backwards in the order, but we're okay to do that, right?
Yeah, and here I've got on the slide that I've got up there right now. This is from your bylaws. It says, here's the process of each application. Applicant comes up and presents. You ask questions to the applicant and staff. Chair calls for public comment, which means, and it doesn't distinct, y'all are a little different. You don't have a pro and con. You can just have speakers. I don't know if you list them as pro and con, but generally speaking, that they can come up and speak. You should call them just individually as their call. Then there's an item for discussion on the application. It doesn't necessarily say questions to the individuals, but I feel like if you have questions of anyone that's spoken, you can do that. I would like it to be very specific, and rather than a discussion with them necessarily, it's intended to be a discussion amongst yourselves with clarifying questions if necessary from the applicant. It'll ease your burden, and you say this isn't the time. You've had your time to make your presentation. Inevitably there's going to be some. You need to ask a question, and I'm not sure what you mean. What did you mean? And well, if I did this, would that be sufficient? There's inevitably going to be some, but you do have to. I think you should try to be limited in your engagement with the applicant after they've made their presentation, and use it. I mean, you're a little bit more in the weeds, so you're going to have a little bit more than others will. So that's why I say, yeah, there's the ability to do that.
I don't want to belabor this if you have something important to get through, but I did want to go back to the question on conditions for a second.
Mm-hmm.
You meant both boards can set conditions. You mentioned something about it had to be something, I don't know what your word was, something tangible, or maybe something pointed to in the code, or, that's codified. We get all the time somebody coming up and saying, well, this meets the vision for view shed. I don't know if view shed is defined or not. Somebody says it meets the vision of an equestrian community, or this meets the vision of the 2035 whatever plan, or some other trails plan that somebody worked on. Those are not codified items.
Well,
Can we reference a study that's not codified and say, we're putting a condition because somebody thinks down the road this is the way it should be?
Well, and there is some room for interpretation of what the I'm not sure if you're talking about conditions or the criteria that the ZBA or BZA applies.
I think it came up when we were talking about putting conditions on.
Okay.
And most of the conditions we would do would not be codified. It would be our design theories and what we have gotten from the city architect. So ours would not be as legal as yours is.
You know, I would,
Difference, yeah.
the more they are set, the closer they are to the code, because it says compliance with the code is what you're supposed to be ensuring.
Yeah.
I mean,
I understand.
In the end, compliant. But when you're recommending conditions to others, I mean, honestly, at that point in time, you know, I feel comfortable that, I mean, it came up because the conditions are supposed to ameliorate the negative benefits. And if you're looking at, well, I think a negative benefit is how it looks. Because the city has made a particular emphasis a lot of times of how things look. They have form-based codes, you know, which are geared largely to that. That makes it a valid consideration for a condition that is ameliorating the impact of a variance or ameliorating the impact of a rezoning. That's where it comes up. Generally speaking, let me hit for motions. I think we're getting around to with the BZA. I think for the most part, it's like make a motion to approve application, whatever, to establish a variance with the following conditions, and they're listed out, and you all do a good job. I think for when you, the one thing I think I wanted when I saw the videos of the meetings, just a motion with respect to the recommendation, just say move to recommend approval. I think y'all kind of do it as a, did staff get all of our comments? You did a good job. I think I saw one, they were summarized, that helps. But I think if you can get a summary and motion to make the recommendation that these comments be provided, or make that the recommendation of the DRB, something like that. Just makes it formal, that goes on the record. They can be very clear what they're sending to everyone else. That would be just one step that I saw could be taken. Y'all do a good job. The motion's on the finals. And there wasn't a demolition permit on it, but I assume that you handle them the same as the final reviews. And so that shouldn't be a problem.
Is there anything else in the motion other than the variance number and the conditions, if there are conditions?
Typically you read the variance for what the variance is.
But
I mean, and that's not necessary, but it seems like a standard, right? Variance to allow
Site plan?
Reference a plan.
I know that's something that's come up.
site plan is typically a condition that's
Okay.
very commonly attached. If they say, I want a variance and here's what I'm going to do, you say, okay, well, as long as that's what you're going to do.
But that
So-
needs to be in the motion.
If you want it to be, yeah. Then that, with a condition that it meet all of the requirements as shown in the site plan.
Got it.
Dated, and Todd will certainly help you through that, and Hodge, and I don't know, Don, Brenda, everybody. But yeah, just a good description so that someone can go, I know what document to look at.
Great.
Minutes, all I want to say about minutes is, go ahead and take a look at them. The minutes are the official record. After the minutes are approved, it almost doesn't matter what really happened. It's what those minutes say. So if you take a look and make sure if it said you seconded something, then make sure you seconded it. If you thought that the motion was to grant a 50-foot buffer and it actually said 60-foot buffer, go back and check and, question whether or not there's a typo in the minutes or whatever, because that will be the eventual record. Yep.
In today's digital world, now that we have recording sessions, in an appeal case, as an example from the Board of Zoning, if there were a discrepancy of what was actually said in the record of video versus what was documented, how would that be handled?
We send everything up when we do it, and we cite to portions of the video if we want because typically they're not taken down verbatim. So if we want the verbatim what someone said, we'll go to the video. Generally speaking, the minutes reflect the votes, and maybe some people spoke and what they generally talked about. But officially, it's still the minutes. That's why we say do take a look at them to make sure that they do match your understanding. If they don't come into the meeting, all you got to do is make a motion to approve, except that on page 4, that variant or that, condition was established pink instead of blue or rose instead of fuchsia. I don't know. Go ahead and as long as it accurately depicts what happened. You can't go back and change. I voted no, but I think I want to go on record as yes now. So can you change the way the vote's recorded? And you obviously can't do that, but you can make the record. You can change the minutes before you vote to make them reflect what actually happened. For meeting efficiency, I thought, everybody has a different opinion of what's efficient. Some may say, hey, look, if we can get everything hammered out in one meeting and it takes us 2 hours to get that done, we have done a good job. They're not going to come back. They're going to have the program staff is never going to have to look at it again. Great. Others may say, look, I want to get in, get out. If they aren't prepared, then that's their problem, but I'm going to give them their 10 minutes. They got their 10 minutes, then we're voting and we're gone. People see it differently. I think the general idea that I take from it largely is not engaged in too much discussion about the general concepts and how things are kind of outside. Focus on this particular project, this particular building. If you have a question about how it's going to be built, ask the question how it's going to be built. Try not to get in too much back and forth. You're chairman, both of y'all, you're in control of the meeting. You can, if you think one of the members is going down a road that, look, we're not worried about that aspect of this project. Maybe we can look to something else, look to the 3 items that are before us. Chairman, you can, I don't suggest it become antagonistic and, Mr. So-and-so, you're out of order. I'm calling the question. There's some, and some of these presentations we have where they're directed towards it, we have video of ridiculous conduct between members. I've never seen that be a problem in any of these. Occasionally there may have been members that might have perhaps taken things down a road, started to maybe design maybe more than was really being asked from the applicant, and it started to drag out a little bit. Sometimes that's good, sometimes it's bad. It just depends. As kind of chairman, you have the ability to kind of guide the meeting. Again, I'm sorry, we've hit 6 o'clock. If you want to look through the rest, I've put some additional items in the end regarding conflicts of interest, code of ethics. I don't think there's typically a problem. I will say, if you own some property that comes before you, recuse. If you have a question, ask me. You can send something to me ahead of the meeting, and we'll give you an idea of whether it's you need to recuse or not. We're happy to do that. It happens on occasion. It may not be a direct interest. Maybe you live 2 houses down and you want to ask questions. And again, anything that's on here, feel free to reach out to me. If I may not have put my information on there, but staff will be able to contact us if you need to. I'm always open to help you out. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
See you all in a few minutes. We'll see you whenever we see you.
Yeah, and like,